Hey everybody, I'm Ken Pooch Van Druten. Along with me is Chris Rabold.
What's going on, everybody?
Hey, we're up to episode 19. Sure are enjoying all of this comments and response to everybody joining, and we're very, very grateful that you guys have subscribed and are here with us. We're enjoying kind of trying to give back to the sound community, so thanks for being here.
Absolutely. I say it every time, but this is our escape too.
It
is.
You
know what I mean?
Totally. I mean,
Right.
this times that we're having right now in our industry are a tough time, and this is our time to talk about audio. Everybody talks about how they want to. All I want to do is go back and just do a show, and we're feeling that as well. But at least with this, we're getting an opportunity to at least chat about audio.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing. But
I've
hopefully,
never been a social commentary kind of guy on social media. Not social commentary, like I'm not going to get political, but the other day I was driving down the road and I heard some song on the radio by one of my clients. I fucking teared up, man.
Aw.
Like I did. I know. I feel like super sap saying that, but I wasn't sitting there weeping, but it was like a grip the wheel kind of moment. And I'm just like, man, I was so tempted to like jump on some social media platform and be like, guys, I miss this shit so bad.
Well, definitely. I mean, I think that's the kind of the overall thing out there. Of course, everyone is worried about financial insecurity, but I think the real deal is that we all love what we do. And so not being able to do what we love is, takes a toll on us. So.
And we're starting to, excuse me. Also, we're starting to get our own little island as an industry where the country's opening up, but we're not opening up.
I know.
You know what I mean? So suddenly we're adrift on our own, and it's kind of like, hey, no, we're not okay. We're not going back to work with mask on at 20% capacity. Like we got a long way to go. So
I know
it's pretty intense. Not to throw a bummer sort of spin on things to start, but just a real thing. I know everybody listening is going to agree. Like we're kind of, cast adrift here at this point.
No, for sure. I mean, I think, part of a problem that we have is that we don't have a huge lobby. There's not a bunch of people screaming going, hey, what about all these guys? Because I mean, I heard a number the other day, which I think it's true, that there are 12 million people that work in the live event industry. Now that includes, everybody that's has to do with anything in the live event industry. But listen to it, 12 million of us are not working right now. I mean, that has to account for something. Like somebody has to stand up and say, hey, there's 12 million of us over here that aren't working.
Yeah. But that's the irony, though. Like we all, for whatever reason, decided to go off, join the circus, have this cool left of center lifestyle. And with it is we don't have representation. We don't have all these protection things. But we had this cool, and now suddenly it's like, oh shit, I could use that right now.
Well, yeah. I know. And I mean, and along with that is we've talked about this in the past when we talked about like even the last video, we talked about contracts and most of us work as independent contractors, and that works really well when we're working. But when we run into something like this, there's no advocate for us.
Yeah, it's true.
So, anyway,
good times, everybody.
Yeah, good times. Hang in there, guys. It's going to be okay. We are going to go back to work. It's just we don't really know when. Hopefully soon. Anyway, today's episode, I thought we've been getting a lot of comments, kind of asking us, what's your favorite console? What consoles have you used? What ones do you like? And I thought that maybe we just kind of talk about consoles today, and also maybe like even go all the way back to when we first started using stuff. Like what was do you have a memory of the very first console that you ever touched?
No, I feel pretty strongly when I was allowed to mix a live show, it would have been a PD of some sort.
Sweet. Was it a Mark 8? Was it a Mark 8? Do you remember that console?
the Mark 8 have the like it was flat and all the things patched on top, and sometimes it would have like a little leather flap that also would go over it where on the patch section. Yeah.
And it had the knobs on it were backwards. They pointed at you. So like boost and cut was like backwards pointed at you.
Yep. Mark 8 was definitely, if it wasn't the first, it was an often used console.
That's so awesome.
I'm just gonna guess it was a PD of some sort. Yeah.
That's
what
right.
about you? What was your first? Do you remember?
Well, I come from being a recording engineer, so like, basically the first live sound console that I remember touching. I had an experience where I literally overnight went from a recording console to a live sound console, and for the life of me, I don't remember that one particular show what console that was. I'm guessing it was a Midas, maybe an XL4. I'm not sure, but the first console that I really remember like using a bunch was actually a Yamaha PM 1800 or 2000. I think it was an 1800. It had big knobs on it. I remember that. And that was kind of, the first console that I got to use a bunch. And I remember it not having, a whole lot of busing. Like there was like 2 aux sends.
That's funny. When you look back at old consoles, it's like you had 2 to 4 sends on a lot of them. You know what I mean? 8 groups was a luxury.
Oh man, I know.
Look at all these things now where we talk about like, well, I have 13 buses of effects just in case, or
totally. Yeah, when I hear guys start bitching about how they've run out of aux sends or mixes on a digital console, and they're talking about, I only have 64 aux sends or 64 mixes, I laugh because it's like, this is not at all what I remember first starting out. But so I think for me I certainly got to use a PV Mark 8 a bunch. I remember on like club tours that was like the console at those old school rodeo boot scoot places, you would play. Those were like the console of choice because they were cheap. But man, I used all kinds of consoles. Do you remember? Let's see. There was the EX56. Do you remember that console?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
That was like jumping into, when I started out at the club level, that was the thing of magazines for me,
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that console sounded amazing, but it had its own kind of, that console and the Harrison console, the ones that, Shoko was using Harrison's, Claire Brothers, I think, had their own console. All of those were like super high def audio, at that point. And the metering, I just remember the metering on the EX56, which is similar to kind of like Doro metering, was when I first got on. I was like, whoa, look at this metering. This is amazing.
I think of when I look at what I love about the SD7 so much and the SD5 is that meter bridge, which reminds me of the Gamble,
totally. Yeah. The plasma part of that. I always think of like Doro meters when I think of the Gamble and the EX56. It looks like that. But those things, man, were touchy. Like I remember being on a bunch of tours as a monitor engineer on a Gamble, and like every day you'd have to bang on the quarter of it to get it to get it to work. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. The full on TT patch bay. Did you ever work on a Ramza?
The 840.
Okay.
So when I started in the shit clubs, not like I'm so raw, I'm such an OG, but I did. So I remember, I started, and so this was the mid 90s. So it was whatever was left over from the 80s, like manufacturers I can't even remember, never even knew. Then it was a lot of Soundcraft, and that was around the time that Soundcraft came out with their Spirit series.
Yes.
a lot of Spirit in my life. Mackie was like at their peak. So there was a lot of Mackie. Then there was tons of PV. And the PV that I had, PV had this one like large format mixer. It was like a real legitimate, and someone right now is like going ding, ding, ding. I know it, but it was like big, like 40 channels. And that was at this place
you're talking about the Mark 8. That was their flagship, right?
The one I was thinking of is the Mark -3.
Yeah, right.
But that was a big deal. I remember some of the knobs were pink, some of them were blue, and it might have even had a center section. That was a big deal. I worked at this place called Main Street in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. First I was just a dude that would mix there. Then I was like the house guy for a little while, and that was a huge deal. But when I made it to, and I've mentioned that place Soundcheck a number of times because again it was so formative for me. They had, among other things, they had a Ramza 840 in there. That Sound Image had a room. Right. And they dumped in that room. They had their phase lock PA, gigantic boxes, the phase lock PA, and then they had their carbon fiber wedges, and they had probably their worst, barely functioning Ramza 840. And man, I hit the big time when I had that thing. And if you remember, the faders were like that wide,
right?
That was like a kid, and it was super scratchy. So totally. When we decided we were going to talk about this today, I was like, oh, the Ramza. That was a big
Yeah, that thing's awesome. On the other thing I do with Tater, we were talking with Dave Shadone this week, and he was talking about those composite wedges and where they came from. And he told us that it's all from boat manufacturer. Like, they were in San Diego there or whatever, and they were like, hey, these guys are making boats out of this composite material. We could make it and make it light. And he said the problem with them initially was that they sounded amazing, but they were so light that they would walk around the stage.
We had a carpet stage in room B where they were, and they would they would just move everywhere.
Yeah.
Those were great.
But yeah, anyway, I did what was that tour, man? I was mixing monitors for a bunch of punk bands. The Luna Chicks. Do you remember the Luna Chicks? They were New York punk band, all girl punk band.
Oh, that's cool.
Anyway, and that was on a Ramza 850. And man, that console, it's not that it sounded amazing. It didn't. Honestly, it wasn't the most amazing sounding console, but it was a workhorse. It always turned on. It always worked. Like you could dump it off the back of a truck and it would work, It
wasn't Ramza tied in with Panasonic or something like that.
I'm not sure.
I totally may have just made that up. But in my mind, there was always some tie-in with them. Yeah, and that console too was cool because it, aside from like that was something I had read about, it truly was like very highly featured. Like there was a lot of that was a cool desk.
And its metering sucked. It was all VU meter.
All VU.
And so like literally like when I was mixing a girls New York City punk band, it was literally like the song would start and it would just go ink.
Yeah, right.
And then for the entire song, and then at the end of the song it would just go.
Yeah. I find myself that way with VU meters a lot, if I'm honest. I like the thing about staying between the threes on VU meters, like -3 to put, that's like a healthy place. In mine, it's just like, then it gets a rest for a minute. Man. What else? I'm trying to think of like around that. See, I never did any Harrisons. I knew about the Harrison stuff, but again, I mentioned that when I was at that place, Soundcheck, that's a lot of times the Showco engineers would come through, and at night when they'd leave, I'd go check out their stuff. So I was enthralled with Harrison desk, but I literally I've touched one now, like a defunct one that sits at Claire or something, but I never toured with one. I never did a show on one.
Amazing sounding desks. I mean, I think we're about to get into the point that, I mixed on an XL4 for years. And so we'll talk about that console in a minute. And this, to me, the Harrison was, in my world, was the desk that I used mostly prior to an XL4. And they sounded amazing and still do to this day. They're a little bit clunky, like the connectors and all that kind of stuff were janky. And so keeping the thing running on the road was hard. But if you had a good guy that was maintaining stuff, then it was fine. But I mean, even to this day, like if I were looking, I don't know, like if I were mixing Steely Dan or something, I would literally like be looking at maybe mixing on a Harrison, even a recovered one, just because they sound so amazing.
You know what? That's a good point. And this is something that I've often, I've made note of, you know, in all other facets of audio, as things age, sometimes things just become old and outdated, but then oftentimes things become vintage. In live sound, nothing is vintage. It's all just old and shitty. Like these top tier consoles we're talking, and I don't feel that that's the real deal.
No.
Like I feel like in fact, I contacted Jim Gamble, just cold emailed him several years ago.
Cold email,
maybe 10 years ago. And I was like, hey man, would you rack a few channel strips for me? You know? And it never came about. But like, I think about these old desks, like we're going to start talking about the Midases, and
that
was real. That was cool. And like, yeah, some of those old things, like I'm with you. I don't know that a Harrison wouldn't blow people away right now. Or what was it? Pav Boothroyd did AC/DC. I say recently, I've lost all track of time. It might've been 5 or 10 years ago, but he did one on a Midas. What was the precursor to the XL series? Was it a Pro?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I don't know. You know what I'm talking about? The older ones.
Yeah.
He fairly recently, within the last decade, went out and did it, and I heard it, and it was amazing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, this brings up the whole, you know, we've had this discussion before, analog versus digital, and, you know, you put up an analog desk next to a digital desk and you compare them, A/B them right next to each other. Most of the time, you and I and others are going to go, yeah, I kind of like the analog desk. It sounds pretty good. But it's all the benefits that you get from digital that has led us to this place. And nowadays, you know, most digital desks sound pretty amazing. But I think there is something to be said for older analog technology, including summing, and to me it's front end and summing, right? So the mic pre part of what an analog mic pre does, and then what summing happens in an analog situation is sometimes a better sound than what's going on in digital, for sure. So I think, you know, there is a place for it, you know. Do you know Hootsy, Jim Huth?
Only the name. Who is he? What is he?
He has he mixed like Stone Temple Pilots forever.
Right.
But he still mixes to this day. He does God, I don't know. I think it's a boy band, and he mixes a lot of the Disney kind of artists, you know. But anyway, shout out to Hootsy. He's amazing. He's a great dude. But in his house, his coffee table in his house is a Harrison.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Some of those were very like aesthetically pleasing too. Again, going back to the Gamble. I mean, that's about as good with the wood top and the,
yes,
you know, that's a good look, man. I swear to God, we're going to get there when we get to Digico. Part of the aesthetic factor in the feel, the literal feel of it is something I'm going to make note of too. You know, that matters, especially when you're on tour with these things, like you live with them.
Totally.
You know, you know, what's interesting too, is like, as we talk about these things, and it's the same way now, people get into these factions of console, you know, and you start associating certain mixers and certain mixer types with the consoles they use. And then you also, and particularly it used to be this way, certain companies certain genres gravitate towards it. It's so interesting. It's the same way today. You know, it's the exact same way.
Totally is. For at least in my career, I went probably from that Harrison time straight to an XL4. And it's interesting, you know, I know a lot of guys and yourself included, I think, have had experience on the other consoles in that line, like the XL3 and the XL2, and there's like an XL200, and you know, there's all these different versions of that. But I primarily worked on an XL4. I only mixed on the XL3 probably for one tour I was mixing monitors on it. The XL4 I was on for literally like 10 years, and that was the workhorse of for me, the 90s into the 2000s just a little bit. But that console was just a dream to work on. It was an amazing sounding console. Was that your console of choice, or where did you end up?
Or which one were you talking about there at the end? The 3 or the 4?
The 4. The XL4 is the one that I always ended up on.
The 4 is for sure where I ended up, and the 4 is the one that I often dream about making my way back to eventually. In some shape, form, or fashion. Yeah, I saw something today, scrolling through my phone as we do on Facebook. Some guy, I don't even know who it was. I literally don't know who the human being is a friend of mine. And he posted something today about the XL3. It was like maybe a history of. In fact, I have somewhere around here, I still have a brochure for XL3. I too.
No way, that's awesome.
I inherited one from someone on a gig. I only used it then, but it was amazing, and it had the VU meter bridge on it.
Yeah.
Oh, but it was like, yeah, because once you got, if that had you only had, if I'm not mistaken, shelving on the high and low bands. It only had groups, right? I don't think the XL3 had VCAs.
No, I'm trying to remember, dude. Like seriously, it's been so long since I've been in front of it.
Right?
Yeah.
And then I made it to the XL4, and that, to me, that is like still sonically the gold standard, and just, oh my God, it was built like a tank. You talk about another iconic meter bridge.
Yeah.
That was as good as, and I'm with you. That man, it sounded great. Like you weren't doing +8 on like the EQ, you'd crack it, which I realize now. And then you'll find people that'll tell you, they're like, yeah, it's because those filters were like wildly erratic, and what you were thinking was +2 was actually +6. And if you wanted it to be this narrow, it was actually this wide. That's why the musicality of it, totally. I remember, again, speaking of the factions of engineers at that point in time, there was the Yamaha user base. There was the 3K, 3500, 4K guys.
Yep.
And there was the Midas guys. And that was a faction, And I remember my friend Jason Swartz, shout out to Jason Swartz, was with Rex Ray in Nashville at a shop there, and they put a Midas console on a scope. And he called me up and he was like, dude, it's so cool. They put them both on a scope. He's like, because remember the rip or the thing was always, well, the Yamaha stuff is like super clinical and clean. It doesn't have a set. You can drop it off the truck. The Midas is super colored. He's like, we put it on a scope, and like nothing happens through the Yamaha. It's so clean. And he's like, and the Midas is just crazy. It's all distorted, and there's all, and I was like, oh, that's so cool,
Well, I mean, that's harmonic distortion, right? Part of what made there was a bunch of things that made the XL4 so awesome. But I think you touched on the front end part of that console had harmonic distortion in it that was super pleasing to the ear. It was colored. It had it's so funny that later on in my career, now that I'm talking, I'm using Digico and stuff, I use it because it's so transparent. And back then I used the XL4 because I liked the coloration that it had in it. I think it's just a different philosophy in your front end of things. So the front end of that had tons of harmonic distortion, which was awesome. And then it was the summing part of that console, the thing called overbiasing, that when you got in that console where you were between the green and the last yellow in the meter bridge part of that, this thing happened where all of a sudden everything just glues together, and there's this amazing analog summing thing that happens in that desk that I haven't really experienced since.
No. No. I listened to an old recording the other day, some Widespread Panic thing I did, and I remember everything about it. It was on XL4. And I heard that, but I kind of heard that as you maybe started to push a little far, started to get a little gnarly, and it was very much a nostalgic sound. I'm like,
there's a fine line there. Sometimes you push too hard into it and it gets a little wanky, but basically output biasing is kind of analog compression is what I can describe it, and it's glue. And I think it's a lot of what, people talk about is missing from digital summing. And therefore, you have a lot of guys out there, like Toby Francis, he uses analog summing. He makes stems out of a digital console, puts it into, analog, stuff and sums them because he's chasing that is what he's chasing. He's looking for that, thing that we experience with XL4s and similar consoles. It's funny you said that, the XL4, see, my opinion of the XL4 is it's amazing and it sounded great, but it wasn't the best sounding console. Like to me, either the Harrison or a little bit after the XL4, I ended up on the show console, which was an analog desk controlled by kind of a digital scheme. It was a very interesting console. What's that?
Digitally controlled analog.
Digitally controlled analog, yeah. And it was a very interesting console. But the sound of that desk, was unbelievable. And to me, sounded better than the XL4. But there was something about the XL4 in all ways, in that it was a road warrior. It summed awesome. The front end part of it was really great. And the tools that it had really kept it as in the top of my, choices for like 10 years. It had some pretty janky automation in the VCA section. Did you used to use that?
Nah, and I did the whole, I never used it at all with the VCAs. Couldn't you get it where the input faders would also move? Like they were black. I want to say there was I knew that you could automate the VCAs and the input faders, but that was basically it, right?
Yeah, but almost no one had any of the input channel ones. There was a lot of guys that had the VCA ones. I used the VCA ones. Not all the time, but if I had a band that had some pretty drastic changes that I needed to have happen quickly, when I was mixing Limp Bizkit, they had a bunch of stuff where from song to song there was like a bunch of changes that I needed, and so I was using the automation part of that. And I was in Amsterdam at what's that theater in Amsterdam that everyone?
Is it the Milk Weg, or I don't know what the name of it is.
I can't remember. It's an iconic theater that everyone goes to. It's a balcony, and the whole thing. Yeah. Anyway, some dude 3 songs in chucks a 40-ounce beer and it barely misses my ear and lands right in the center of my desk and just explodes 40 ounces of beer across the whole console. And the first thing that broke as we were trying to grab, towels and whatever, was the automation of the VCA thing. And literally it was going like +12, -6, 13, jank. And it was, I just remember it was almost like you wanted to duck from the audio that was like coming at you, before you could reach over and mute the PA. And I just remember it like totally destroyed the console, and the production manager's out there, and he's out there going, what's going on? And I'm like, we don't. Yeah, it was Grattan.
I love
it. we don't have a show, dude. That's it. The console's dead. Some dude threw a beer, and that was it. They played 3 songs, and
you called it?
Oh man, it would not work. It would not fire back up. It was destroyed.
The worst I ever had, I caught a beer. I've caught several beers in the console from like when you'd be at a club or a theater or something and that balcony's there and you're just like, oh shit, this is a bad idea. Of course, I've caught some there, but I caught and I watched it the whole way. I remember being at Red Rocks. Actually, there's twice. Once in Ogden, Utah at some arena, and then once at Red Rocks. I watched the beer come flying. And it didn't hit the XL4. I had an XL4 with an XL3 sidecar, which was a killer combination,
Totally.
and it hit the sidecar, and it was like it just snap, crackle, pop. It didn't die. It just sat there and until it dried out, or I don't know what the hell happened.
Wow. We had to have a guy from Midas came the next day, wherever we were traveling to the next day. He got there at 7 a.m. We dumped the console the first thing off the truck, and he spent the entire day with, Q-tips and whatever he had to clean the fucking thing. And it took him all day long, but about 5 o'clock, he had the thing all cleaned up and ready to use again, which I always thought was amazing.
Something interesting before we move on to the next era of consoles. And I'm still kind of this way now. I went from like club stuff to XL3, XL4. That was my thing. And I never touched the Harrison, and I never touched the show console. I never touched any of those. But even to this day, the industry standard, well, it's not necessarily the industry standard anymore, but with Yamaha desk, I was never, I like you, I used the 1800, the 2000, the whole series. I never have toured with a Yamaha desk.
Really?
And no, I just never worked with an act where I did. And like, even in the more recent years, when the 5D became the goal, the whatever, it was the most common. Man, when I'd get on the most common thing out there was the days I needed the most help, because it was just nothing I just never, I loved what I used, and I was never using it. So it was kind of interesting. Yamaha, as common as it is, has always been the one that I'm like, how do you do that again? On those consoles. So
it's funny. I did a TV show in Los Angeles that was a kids variety show, and that was the console they had was a 3K. And so I was there for a year and a half, and so whatever 5 days a week in front of a 3K. I was very familiar with how that desk worked. Not like looking back on it, not the greatest sounding desks. Like they were. I wouldn't even use the word transparent. It's not that they were transparent. They were colored, but in the wrong way.
I always thought of them as like not transistor radio-y, but it was like something very, I don't know, like there wasn't a lot of low lows and there wasn't a lot of high highs, and it wasn't something.
I think the way that I always described it for me was solid state versus tube. Like, to me, a Yamaha desk sounded very solid state and very sterile and very, whereas the colored Midas XL4 desk sounded, like a tube, amp. But yeah, so, I had a fair share of tours on a 3K and a 4K. I lost Yamaha after that. I never myself did actually, that's not true. I did
5K.
Yeah, I did. No, I never used the 5K, but I did use the 5D, the first digital one. I used for System of a Down tour. For it had just come out, and it was like the latest thing. And I think we were doing Ozfest, and that's what Greg Price was using. And so we wanted to be able to, go from whatever, use his console. Because that was, when we get into digital consoles, which is the next thing we're going to get into, the initial sell of digital consoles was, we only need one, and you can bring your file, and we don't have to have, 4 consoles in front of house. Which, as we know, turns out that's just not true. So yeah. But yeah, and that was my Yamaha journey was, 3K, 4K, and then, a little bit into the 5D. But as soon as Yamaha got into digital world, I found their interface to be pretty clunky. Like, it wasn't even about the sound so much. I was like, I could get around this and do whatever I need to do, but just like paging through stuff was really clunky.
It was, it was kind of intimidating because it was such a new platform, of course. But yeah, me too. There was just so many pages and
like buried pages. You'd have to push a button to get through. I don't know. It it never was intuitive to me. There were so many other consoles that were felt very intuitive. Yeah. So, I've had my fair share of shows on it, but haven't used it too much. What's weird about that is that, when they started making like the CL series and like the latest versions of stuff. In fact, I think today or yesterday they came out with a PM5, which is their latest version of excellence. I've only had limited experiences on those, but I know that their sound improvement is incredible. Like, the difference between a 5D, that generation of digital for them, and the new CL and larger series is night and day, right? What's your experience?
For sure. In fact, I didn't see the new console, but I did see a post, excuse me, where they've released their current flagship offerings, which is the PM10. What is it? The revised.
The Rivage and the PM10, I guess, or whatever. But this is this is the latest thing. Like, how Digico just released 338 or whatever. This is their answer to that.
Right. What is the one? Is it the 10? I can't remember. Whatever their current flagship offering is. I can't remember the numbering scheme. Toby mixed on one. You know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
I think there's a 10 and a 7. I think it's the 10. The quick reply is yes, you're 100% correct. It sounds phenomenal. I did this gig at NAMM for Yamaha a couple years ago, and I had a few days in the shop. I prepped it there. I learned how to use it, and then we had one day of rehearsals, and it was like with this big 50-piece orchestra, and then all these different bands would come and go and this and that, and it was awesome. Like awesome. Everything that I'd heard, which I wasn't skeptical of because it was all the right people. And a lot of old Midas people, a lot of old Midas users were touting its benefits.
Right.
So I knew it was pretty good. It was phenomenal. But I walked away from it thinking, I was like, it's great. But my excuse for maybe never carrying forward with it was a lot of my shows required more inputs than it was capable of. And I saw a post today that you can now do 288 or something like that inputs. Shit, there goes that excuse. And it's all the neat modeling. It's all the silk.
Right.
Functionality and the transformer stuff and everything, but it is a phenomenal sounding platform.
I have used it a couple of times. It's funny. My first experience of that, when they first released that flagship console, I think it's the PM10. I think you're right. Tater and I were doing what were we doing? I can't remember what band it was, but we were going somewhere where it was going to be a video shoot. Okay. And Yamaha had made some sort of, I think it was Linkin Park, because we were going to do some video shoot, and Yamaha had made some sort of deal with the video provider, whoever it was. I think it was one of those things like where it was at Apple or whatever. And so all these corporate people had made all these kind of deals, including Yamaha. And so they weren't going to let us bring our board groups. Like, they were literally fighting. I mean, fighting hard, saying it's the Yamaha, it's the latest thing, you guys come and use it. It's going to be fantastic, all this kind of stuff.
Point, brief aside on a gig like that. The point is not whether it's the point is, I'm already dialed in with my top tier client on this desk.
That's absolutely it. And that was our argument. Like, listen, I've spent 3 years creating this file, and now you're expecting me to show up and just dial and smile on this, thing. And I get where they were coming from. And this is not only Yamaha. I've heard about this happening, other manufacturers trying to make that happen. I haven't heard about it recently. I think it was a thing for a minute there. Like, console manufacturers were saying, well, you can show up and our console sounds great, so it's going to be good. But I mean, if you don't learn anything from us on this stuff, learn how much time and energy Chris and I spend on creating a file for an act. I mean, hours every single day, chipping away at it to make it better. So now you're asking me to show up somewhere and just be like, oh yeah, I can just dial and smile, which I could have, but it's going to be nowhere near what the band is used to expecting
and deserving.
But anyway, I tell you that whole story because what it did was, of course, in the fight over it, they were like, well, you need to come to Yamaha and we're going to put you in front of one and have a guy teach you all the stuff and, whatever. So I ended up spending 2 days, like you, in front of it with some virtual playback, and I was thoroughly impressed. I'm not going to lie. It is a great sounding desk. There's no question. Guys that I trust and admire use it. Toby Francis uses it. I can't think of someone else right now, but there are, heavy hitters that are using those desks, and they do sound amazing. There's no question. What I did notice about it was that it still kind of was clunky. It still had clunky interface that is left over from their initial 5D thing.
There is, and I was thinking when we were talking, there are other people that are, as they hear us talk, they would say, no, there's no desk that I can get to more quicker, because on the surface, it does have it all right there. It's just when you have to start going into the menu,
yes,
that it goes. So I'm with you, and this just goes to show it's whatever you're used to as well.
Yeah, I mean, totally. So as we're getting into the later desks here and the ones closer to what's available today, I think it's a lot like speakers and what we were discussing. It's really like, what flavor do you like? What are the options about something that you like? And now it is, what am I the fastest on?
Because that's it. Sorry to interrupt, but no, I am wildly intrigued by, and I've said it on here 100 times. I say it in magazines and stuff all the time. I also just stab myself in the hand with a pen. I am.
Do you need a Band-Aid? You're right.
That's it. I'm wildly intrigued by a number of consoles, but when push comes to shove and I need to get results really, really fast, it's not being timid. I need to go with what I know works quicker, and then I keep going. Okay, maybe next time I'll do that. Maybe next time I'll do that on these other platforms. Yamaha being one of them. That experience I had at NAMM was so positive that I can't shake my curiosity on it. But if we all get a call tomorrow to finally go back to work, I know what's going in front of me. You know what I mean?
A PV Mark 8?
Mark 8, by God. A Crest something.
Oh, God, I forgot about that Crest.
I was going to say it. I figured maybe at the end I'd throw Crest in there, which technically the Gamble was a Crest, or became a Crest.
That's true.
We kind of talked.
But what was that? I don't remember the model number of that Crest that everyone used.
I can't remember what the front. I feel like the monitor was like an LM or something, and I can't for the life of me remember what the other ones. That to me was a step up in my career when I started using Crest desks. That represented, and they came to mind when I mentioned the transistor radio sound, because after a while I started thinking, no, these things sound like, they just looked cooler. They had more shit on them. It was a step. So
I remember they had cheesy buttons though, like the buttons would, if you hit the button too hard, it would literally like pop off and go shooting off into the darkness.
As red and white, the mute and the solo were there at the top. Yeah. So let's do this. Let's move into what was your first digital? Let's move into the mid 2000s now. What was your first digital desk?
My first digital desk was the Digico D5. Not the SD5.
No.
The D5.
Did you have the instructional DVD that explained the socket patching and all of that? Did you happen to get that?
I didn't, but I will tell you. So I got talked into using it on a Kid Rock tour. And about like 2 weeks into the tour, not even that, like 3 days into the tour, I was screaming at Digico, like, you got to get somebody here to, fix this thing. It's like every day this thing is not working. So literally for like about a month, we had Titus on the road with us, like living on a bus, touring with us, because the D5 that I had was it was like serial number 003. And it just every single day would not fire up. You'd turn the thing on and nothing would work. And then Titus would have to get in underneath the hood there and, receipt cards, all kinds of shit. And actually that desk is the only digital desk that has ever left me hanging for a show. It basically died when Titus wasn't there. It died in the afternoon and would not fire back up, and the hard drive got corrupted, and I could not do a show. I ended up getting a monitor mix sent to front of house, and somewhere there's a picture of me with a little Mackie, you know.
That's what we used to all do. We all had like a little Mackie, and that shit came back down the snake, and you patched into it, and that was your little shit.
And it was me on a comm, actually back to Brett Steck in Monitor World, with me screaming at him, go, turn the guitar up. Oh shit, turn the guitar down. Oh, turn the vocal up. Oh no. Do something, you know, like screaming at him. And I think there's a picture of Claire Brothers with, from that, you know, me screaming into a comm and in front of a Mackie. So, you know, it's funny because that was my initial Digico experience. And they know that. I mean, you know, I love them, and they make amazing products now, but they were, in the beginning, they made this desk that was, you know, honestly, it was a desk that people were carrying a backup to, because it oftentimes didn't work. So that was my first foray. What was your first digital console?
I was doing the XL4 and I watched our monitor guy, Brad Blettenberg. He moved to a 1D. And I just wasn't interested in going there. And I don't know why or how I got talked into it. I too did the D5. But there were so many things I wasn't sure about. This is so funny. I was hoping this would come up in the show one day. I thought about this the other day when I was driving. I had, much like I still have Outboard now, I was kind of like, okay, I'll do the console, but I still need some of my stuff. I had, the first time I did it, the first tour I did it, I kept a rack. I had a whole thing of Drummer DS201 gates, because I couldn't, even though there was something on the surface that would indicate. Yeah. I was so used to having the visual of my gates.
Yes.
That I couldn't do without. So that was my first. And we mentioned, you mentioned something earlier about like what's intuitive, what are you fast on, this or that. I've said this for years. If you can lean over, you can use a Digico. Like, it's very much that same thing. Like, it's all like the way the channel strips, like, it's just all, and they've always been that way. It's very intuitive.
Very intuitive. Yeah, that's true.
And I remember we took, for my virtual playback, when I went up to the 8th Day shop, I took a bunch of DA 78s and we patched those in to try to get me going. So that was the first one. And I didn't have one die to where I couldn't do a show, but I had one that froze. I remember fortunately it was the Encore. We were at the Chicago Theater and it just completely locked up.
I've had it do that a couple of times.
And it was like, fortunately, this is back, I didn't do snapshots, and I used to just mute and unmute everything manually, all across the desk, all the percussion, whatever was going on. And with the vocals, I would do that. And I remember it left a few of the guys muted. And I remember I just sat down on the road case behind me. We had like 2 songs to go, and I was just like, you know, and we did the show that way. So that was my first. So the Digico, I went to Digico D5, and then I'll go ahead and scoot us down the road a little bit. Yeah. Then I quickly became interested in the Digidesign offering, which I know you did as well. Obviously you owned them, but and I went there to the big ass D show. I think I was there by 2006. I think I was only on the D5 for like a year. And while I love that desk, and we could go on with that one for a long time, even despite all of its shortcomings, we've said it on the show a number of times, amazing results. I did not have a very swift, like, I remember the thing that I explained it as after the first show I ever mixed on it. It was some shed. I said it was like I could see a glass, a cup that I wanted to pick up, but every time I went for it would just slip out of my hand. Like, I just was so slow, and I was so mad, you know. Now, after a while, I got to where I think to this day, if I walked up to a profile, man, you give me that mouse, I can just sync that thing from like it's a video game all around it. So I moved to that next, and just fell in love with the playback and the recording and all the plug into every plugin out there. And so that's how long were you on the D5 before you went? Or was that
just that one tour, basically? As I'm sitting here, I was trying to remember like the desks right before that, because for me there was a period where I stopped using the XL4 and I was using other desks. Like the Kiss tour I used, God, it had Amec Recall. Did you ever get to use that?
Yeah, he would talk to you and had all the that was cool.
An Amec Recall. I had that one. And then I went to the show console. I was on the show console for a while. And then ended up, on the D5. And the show console was this weird hybrid, like we talked about, it was analog with digital control. Huge execution rack, all kinds of shit to try to make it work. Great sounding desk though. But yeah, so I was only on the D5 for a minute there, basically that one tour. And then I too ended up going to the profile. I went straight to the profile. I only mixed on the venue like later on, like probably after profiles had been out for a while, is where I ended up on a venue for a tour because that's all they had or whatever. But
there was a lot of wasted space on that. That was huge, that had the footprint. It felt like of a 4K. We're talking about, for some reason, the XL4. The XL4 was a great footprint.
Yeah.
It wasn't as wide as the Series 5 Soundcraft or the 4Ks
it's still huge though, dude. It's still huge. Have you looked at a case these days?
And if you remember, if you were at a tour, let's say you're at a shed, and there's a bunch. Sorry, I keep this trash can. I'm having all kinds of problems today. I'm work on my props better, my set.
I know. I got it. My set's all weird too. Look, I get my microphones all in a different place now today. Anyway, I think it sounds better, but yeah.
Anyway. Sure. So we, if you were at like just a shed, which God, how great! I saw. Speaking of being nostalgic, I saw a picture of like a truck dock in a movie the other day, and that hit me. I know. You would see like all the different consoles. Remember the Heritage would look like a boat. The 4Ks would look like a boat. The Soundcraft Series 5 was so big you couldn't even fit it widthwise in the truck. And the XL4s, even though they were super stocky, they were like a little smart. Now, if you see an XL4 rotate, it looks like a semi truck.
Oh my God! It looks like a piano. Like what? Why are we dragging a piano around? Yeah.
I remember putting those things in. Like I was at the Warfield Theater in San Francisco, and they would put your console in a cargo net and lift it up. Think about that now with those things.
Yeah.
So anyway, the profile was like one of the greatest. What was cool is we hadn't ever had a mixing environment where you didn't have to go anywhere. You never left the spot or had to turn your head. It was that was such a wonderful sized console.
It was, wasn't it? I actually chose to go there because that was when I first started working for Linkin Park, and I did a bunch of research and discovered that Mike Shinoda and a bunch of other guys in the band were real Pro Tools users. Like they were heavy into using Pro Tools. And I was like, okay, I'm going to make a console switch. I think I'll go there because it'll feel to them very similar when they come in and we do rehearsals and stuff. So that was actually the decision that I made to go to that, was because of that. The client had a lot of experience with Avid, and I was like, okay, I want to make them feel comfortable. And it did. They walked into rehearsals, and I know that Mike Shinoda was able to walk up to it and be like, okay, this feels like a lot like Pro Tools. So yeah. But yeah, no, that was a great desk, and I had some great shows on that desk, no question. But cool. When and how did you make the switch to? I know that you use Digico mostly now. When did that happen?
I want to say like right when the SD7 came out. I want to say I jumped on an SD7. I really don't know why I made the change. Like I was totally happy with what I was doing. I think, we talked about not as many sends. If you remember, like I always used the profile in the mode where I essentially had like 8 aux sends, which I think was like the front of house guy way to do it. Maybe I was enthralled with more. I don't know what made me change, but it was probably, I think it was either 2008 or 2009. So I went to the SD7. I had waves on it we're back to where it is now. Of course, although it's still kind of holding hands together, everybody says, well, waves isn't on the desk anymore. It's not, but there's still talking a lot.
It's funny that those two manufacturers, sometimes they point fingers at each other, saying, oh, well, it's their fault or it's their fault. When I look at it and it's all one device. I know that you guys are two manufacturers, but I'm using this as one device. So let's figure out what's wrong,
That whole thing, Waves and Digico, is like such a thing. This is a sitcom. That's logical. You know what I mean? Like it absolutely is. But I had Waves on the external computer. I'm sure I had a little bit of outboard gear with it, but I went there, and I actually, at a certain point, I went back for a little while. I think, well, to be honest with you, I think it was a lot of Waves, Digico. Like, here's the thing with Digico. They are so incredible. They are so forward thinking. They are like the one manufacturer out there. They are a live sound manufacturer. They know our wants and needs. There are a lot of times they would get ahead of themselves, and again, they've heard me say this all the time, but there was this feeling for me for a while. I was like, God, I just feel like it's in perpetual beta. Like it's so far ahead of itself.
Yeah.
That sometimes I was like, I don't know if I want the new release, and all that still burned in me to this day. Like updates, I let stuff sit before I jump on it. So I think
that's a good idea in any digital format, by the way, out there, guys. I know that the tendency for everyone is I want the latest shit, but I am the guy that kind of sits and waits to see what happens.
Absolutely. And I would say this to anyone listening too, of course, do whatever you want, but like if I start a tour, if it's a 2-year tour, it would take a lot for me to update that that console.
Never, ever, ever. I can't think of an example where I've had to do any sort of updating.
I had a very recent Digico Waves fiasco, which it necessitated that I do it. So I was already in the middle of a disaster, and then I had to bring on this. Yeah. So I think I loved it, but I had some weird things, and then I went back. I think I missed my plugins other than Waves. So I went back to Avid at that time for a little while. And then I got to the point, you and I have talked about it a lot, and are often, referencing this. I got to the point where my input capabilities, but then my input needs were so great, I couldn't do it on so I needed to go back to Digico SD7.
Yeah. Well, that is the reason that I ended up on Digico was, so Linkin Park was about to do a tour where it was one of those kind of Ozfest toury kind of things. They called it Project Revolution, and it was a main stage in sheds and then 2 other stages like out in the parking lot, and all kinds of bands. And part of that was they wanted to have a culmination last song of their show with about 100 people on the stage, right? So which pushed our inputs. I mean, dude, we had like a marching band and like a boys choir. And I mean, dude, it was crazy. And so it pushed our inputs way past the 96. That was the limitation of profiles. And also we were at that point where we were kind of looking for a 96K solution. Like we just, doing the, man, this is a whole rabbit hole, going down the rabbit hole of 48K versus 96K,
I feel this having the potential to be a 3-hour one.
Oh my God, I know.
We just now made it.
I know. So, 96K because of latency, and I'm a guy that used a lot of plugins involved in this. I was looking for the 96K solution to eliminate some of the latency. Anyway, regardless, those were all the reasons. And I actually did go to Avid. I was a heavy Avid user. I was using their profile, and I called them up and I said, hey, I need a 125 input 96K solution. When is it coming? And at that particular time, they were like, it's probably 2 years away.
And that was a long while in the making for them to ever make that.
That's right. And they ended up with a product that's really great. The SXL is a great console. But there was a minute there where the profiles and the D show was kind of like going out. And it's where they should have been able to pick it up with the S6, and they didn't. There was a year and a half or so where they kind of had this weird time. And I think it had to do with, Avid Digidesign was going through restructuring, blah, 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 blah.
And they did the thing that a lot of manufacturers do, where that if they started releasing they started going down the ladder. They started releasing all the SC48s, and then they were busy doing that.
Yeah, for sure. So anyway, I mean, that's initially why I ended up on Digico. Honestly, also, we talk about relationships on here a lot. And I had a bunch of interaction with the Digico guys because of trade shows that I was doing, but also because I was involved on the Wave side of when Waves got introduced connecting to Digico. I was actually the guy that was the very first. I was the guy that showed it to about 75 European buyers that all came to London to see this amazing thing where Waves and Digico are now combined. So I was involved in that, even though I was an avid user at the time. I was involved in that little bit. But really it was about the relationships that I had, like with Webby and James Gordon. And they did something, and manufacturers out there, take note of this. They did something that nobody else has ever done with me, which was, hey man, when you're ready, we're always here. We know that we'll take care of you when you want to come and see us. And it wasn't, you really need to be using this console. This is the best console, and you guys, I'm telling you that this is what you need to come use. They weren't that at all. And that meant something to me. That meant, okay, these guys are kind of hanging out in the wings. And when I decide that I'm going to come and work with them, they are going to be 100%. And they backed it up. Their support is 100% to this day. James Gordon is an unbelievable dude. I would struggle going to another console manufacturer right now, not because of anything to do with the sound. It's the fact that James Gordon will pick up his phone at 3:00 in the morning for me. And so, I mean, and it's not just me. I'm not just, I'm not like some special kid. He is a guy that puts 100% into that business, and is now kind of the CEO of the umbrella of companies that are Digico and SSL and whatever else. There's a bunch.
Right.
Anyway, so shout out to Digico. My point to all this is, when we're talking about these top tier consoles, we truly are talking about taste, just like with speakers. But what matters to me is the support and the relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I said it when you were talking. I started thinking about James, and I mentioned that Digico, I think they are just like, I'm thinking of whoever else is out there. Avid has interest elsewhere. And I'm still, this, and us talking, I'm so, God, I want to somehow use the Avid again. I really do, but there's certain reasons that keep me from it. Yamaha builds jet skis. Like there's, SSL has their pedigree in the studio world. Digico is us. They are us. I realize the soundtracks and now they have interest elsewhere, but Digico is us all the way to the guy at the top. James Gordon is, that is his, and I mean this too with all my heart. That is as cool and as real of a dude as you're going to get. And a lot of times the person in that role, they're just like, you almost get the feeling that they're just giving you lip service, but from James to, you mentioned Titus. Titus is still my first call. Totally. Still to this day. He's just the first person I call, to Matt. And now, Chip, I deal with a lot. I don't want to leave anybody out here.
Chip and Paul, all the support guys, all of them. They're all amazing.
I'm scared to name names and miss anyone, but really you go to the top and they are us, and they make consoles for us. Yep. And they know what we want and what we need, and they ask. And I'm with you,
And they take ownership of anything that's fucked up too, which is great. They will say to you like, "Oh shit, yeah, sorry about that. We're working on it. We're gonna fix it." Yep. they to me, they're honest. They're no bullshit company. So that's a lot of the reasons why I use them. I mean, I don't want to make this a Digico ad, and I know that both you and I are Digico users, so that's why we talk about them so well. And just like speakers, we were talking D&B the other day. It's like you might have gone out and gone to a tour with the GSL and been like, oh man, this is like, they've fixed everything. It's amazing, and that's probably, I would feel that same way by going and using an SSL. Now, I know that you have had experience kind of going back and forth from Digico to SSL. What was that like?
Yeah, and a lot of this is coming back full circle, just where we started some of this. Again, you look at the Digico user base. To me, the Digico user base kind of mimics the Midas user base of old. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely, yeah.
Like when you look, and now Yamaha has done something. You mentioned people like Toby or Frank or Coach. There's a lot of the Nashville guys are really into it. They're starting, because of the Neve connection and the sonic imprint. That desk is starting to kind of get some of that too. But you look at the Digico user group, it kind of looks like the Midas group used to. Yeah, I've gone back and forth to the SSL, but again, because I agreed to. It wasn't necessarily something I wanted to do. But we're mentioning the ergonomic wonder of the XL4. To me, the SD7 still, to this day, it feels like an adult console. A grown-up piece of gear. And I'll say this to manufacturers. You say you don't want to sound like a Digico ad. Of course, we don't want to. And the beauty of where we are and all this right now is like, dude, it's just us. We don't have any. We're not beholden to say anything to anyone about anyone. So with the Digico, I'll say this to other manufacturers, so many digital desks now that sound awesome, they feel like fucking toys. The faders feel cheap, the encoders feel cheap, the meters they suck, and I've struggled with that. And the SSL, sonically out of the gate, I might like it better than the SD7 just for a second. I gotta be honest, I don't mind saying it, but
dude, let me interrupt you for a second because that is so funny. I brought up tracks on, I had an SSL 200 in front of me for the very first time, had never really messed around with it. And I was using virtual playback tracks that I was, knew intimately, with Linkin Park. And I literally got mad for a second because I was like, shit, like this sounds better, I think. Just initial bringing things up, like no plugins, no nothing or whatever. I brought my virtual playback tracks up and went, are you kidding me?
And then, it used to be Digico was just blowing everyone out of the water. And now Yamaha stepped up their game. And now SSL is in the game. And like they're summing, they're digital summing.
Yeah, it's good.
Fantastic. The EQ, all of those things. So I won't stay on it for very long because I know we're getting, a little long on time here. But I love the sound of that desk. Sonically, I love it. But I prefer everything ergonomically about the SD7.
I agree. It's all the bells and whistles and ergonomics and snapshots. And, as I got deeper, that was what I was going to tell you was my initial reaction was like, oh, wait a minute, maybe this does sound better. But then as I dug into it, I was like, ooh, I don't like this so much. Or, I'm just trying to remember some of the things, but I noticed things right away.
I can tell you a million of them. You turn one knob and the threshold moves this way. You turn the other knob doing the same thing, but turning the knob that way moves the threshold.
That's it. Yes, I did notice that.
And also, and I've been quoted as saying this before, one of its greatest strengths is the fact that you can do everything 5 different ways. The problem is it doesn't have a very there's not a just default way in everyone's head of doing it one way. And I'll end up with these hybrid workflows that I'd prefer to not have.
That's totally what I discovered.
Yeah, you and I are talking a lot about the SD7. Of course, the Digico platform as a whole is fantastic, but I will say the SD7 with that meter bridge, with that extra set of 12 faders, put all your extra shit on, the way it feels. If I want to kick my feet up on that motherfucker, the way it feels, I feel like it's going to fall apart, So, and then going back to them, who they are as people and as a company, it's hard to. I've been thinking a lot about that during this downtime too, because I have all these, me, my brain's just like, yeah, and I want to do all these things. I'm like, man, why don't you just shut up and stay right where you are? Because it's where you need to be. And, you know, I dig it. And especially now that they've really upped the ante with the quantum things, spice rack and all this.
Yeah, spice rack and mustard are pretty amazing. Yeah.
And I know we're getting long on time. I can think of things I dislike about the Digico too, but that's life, you know.
No, it is. I mean, you know, I think, you know, again, we are talking about the quirkiness of stuff, but honestly, like if you brought me an SSL, a Yamaha, a Digico, a Avid, even like, you know, I guess there's the new Midas console that's kind of Midas Behringer partner. I haven't heard it, but a lot of people are saying that it's amazing. You know what I mean? It's like if you bring me those top 5 consoles, put me in front of them and say, this is your tool, I'll be fine with it. Like, okay, cool. I just prefer, you know, just like ice cream, I prefer strawberry. I prefer Digico because my workflow in it is so much quicker. But anyway, hope you guys got a bunch out of this. It was a lot of fun to just kind of have a conversation about consoles and older consoles and, you know, that kind of stuff. You know, we didn't do maybe a whole lot of teaching today, but it was a fun conversation about, you know, the evolution of what we have used as consoles. So shout out to maybe some of you older guys out there watching this. You know, you may have had some of the similar experiences that we had. So anyway, thanks a lot for tuning in, guys. Subscribe, tell your friends.
See you, everybody.